Yo guys, what's up? Shadow here, and today I'm coming to you with a bit of a different video. It's pretty much now 10 months ago since I bought myself the HTC Vive. And I have to say, I do not regret the purchase. I get to play some awesome games, I experienced things that I probably would have never experienced in real life. But I also noticed some interesting stuff, a trend so to speak, among VR games, and a few problems with VR itself. This thought process that basically created this video was ignited by an article in the Swiss newspaper I found. It stated, "The VR hype is over, but the hope is still alive." And it basically talks about that 2017 was supposed to be the year of VR, but there has been some problems that hindered its success. VR is, as of right now, still an enthusiast gadget and not a mainstream platform. Today I want to talk about exactly that. What are the problems right now, and what needs to happen to make VR a thing for the masses? Alright, let's get the big AAA elephant out of the way first. One of the main concerns for most consumers, I imagine, is that there are not enough big games. I searched and found a list, which I will link down below, a list of AAA VR games that have been on or are released in the near future. This list contains LA Noire VR Case Files by Rockstar Games, Fallout VR by Bethesda, Project Cars 2 by Slightly Mad Studios, StarTech Bridge Crew by Red Storm Entertainment, Payday 2 VR by Overkill Software, Doom VFR, which I'm really sure stands for Virtual Fucking Reality, by Bethesda, Skyrim VR by Bethesda, Lone Echo and Echo Arena by Ready at Dawn Studios, Moss by Polyarch Studios, Starchild by Playful Corp, and Mage's Tale by In Exile. There's also some rumors that Valve is producing some VR games, and of course there's also Half-Life 2 VR. Now, if you would look at that list and pretend that VR just came out, and this is the release lineup, the big games that are supposed to sell this platform to you, what would you see? You would see, well, 4, let's call them remasters. So basically the same games but appropriated and updated for this new platform. Granted, it's a complete new gimmick. It would be like upgrading from a Nintendo 64 to a Nintendo Vive with a new gadget, but still, it's 4 remasters if you really come down to it. And then one quasi-sequel in Doom, because as far as I know it's not the same game, it's a sequel of some sort. A racing game, an adventure game, and a dungeon crawler. A walking simulator, some might say, and a space-themed adventure game. Now, my question. Would you throw out $500 for this new platform? Well, $500 if your PC is strong enough and can handle the load, the VR specs. If not, be prepared to, of course, spend a few $100 or even up to $1,000 more. And you don't even have any games yet. So, yeah, no games, and each game can clock in from a few dollars to up to $30-40 each. So, if you look at all of that, let's be honest. If you would have to decide to buy this console or this platform or not, you will probably say no, right? And that ignores the fact that you need to have space in your living room if you ever want to play some room scale VR, right? So it's obvious that the huge price tag is a problem. But prices, of course, may fall in the future, and they actually have fallen over the course of the year. The space you need, of course, is also just like a minor problem because there's a lot of non-room scale games you can play in a smaller setup. So let's address the big problem, the game selection. What about the game selection? I mean, VR has been on the market for a while now. So why aren't there more big games being produced for VR? Well, it seems it's a very complicated situation. Well, if you look at the perspective from a big developer, they don't have enough faith in the VR market at this point. The market share is just too low. Not enough people are buying VR. And I'm talking about the general like VR. I'm not even talking about a specific gadget. I'm not talking about the HTC Vive in a specific manner. I'm talking about all the different VR gadgets that are out there. People are just not buying it for right now. Therefore, investing into that market is maybe not the best business plan right now. But of course, now you have to ask the question, why are people not investing in VR? Well, beside the price problem, basically because there's no big games. It's not worth it, right? So it's kind of a deadlock situation, it seems. The developers, the publishers are waiting for people to buy VR first before they want to develop, and the people are waiting for the developer to make the first step and bring out some huge games so they can, with a good conscience, buy the platform, right? So it's kind of a dead end right now. But Shadow, I hear you say, there are a lot of small, cool games around. You play a lot of them as well, and you tell people how great they are. Yeah, you're right, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of great games, a lot of great experiences. But, well, let's see, these experiences, these small games, I sort of came to a point where I can categorize all of these small games into one of these categories. It's either a high score arcade game, in which you basically have a very simple job and you do it over and over again just to get a better high score, like Space Pirate Trainer or Cat Sorter. Some of them are walking simulators without much gameplay mechanics, like Quinero or Farspace. There's some point and click, well, you know what I mean with point and click, puzzle games in which you just interact with certain objects in certain ways to solve a puzzle, like pretty much every escape room that I played on VR Sunday. Then there are sandboxes like Hot Dog Horseshoes and Hand Grenades is a pretty good example, which focuses on mechanics very much, but are lacking a bit of like coherent story, coherent gameplay. Although, to be fair, H3 is doing wonders on that front, but more on that later. And lastly, there's a lot of simulators, of course, because VR is very good in simulating things. And with simulators, I mean stuff like Tilt Brush, for example, King Spray Graffiti. You could even count Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades as a simulator if you want to. And I gotta be honest, as much as I enjoyed all of these games I played for VR Sunday, most of them, I really have to be honest here, I haven't touched since the day I played them the first time. There's a few exceptions, like Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades, since the dev is pushing out updates very regularly and is expanding the sandbox quite greatly, actually. But the other ones, I have played maybe a few times. Trickster VR, I recorded, of course, a few sessions of that. Then Toy Plane Heroes, I played a bit off camera. Yeah, basically everything else, just if I look to my Steam library right now, I'll see a lot of 1 hour, 30 minutes, maybe 2 hours tops. And that's because most of these things don't have any semblance of level or progression, or if so, a very small progression or like an iteration, which, well, it is progression, but it's basically just looped. So even if the game is great, and you will get your best 30 minutes of gameplay out of it, sometimes, up to 2 hours, it's just that. It's a 30-minute to 2-hour game. And if you compare that to the price you're paying, well, I can see how a lot of people would not want to make that kind of investment. The cost does not seem to match the benefit there, And that's one of the biggest problems I see right now in smaller VR games. As I said before, they offer zero or low replay value, progression is... Some games have progression, but it's quite meaningless because you don't really have an incentive to play again and again besides the progression itself. I mean, yeah, high scores are kind of great, but seriously, by the 10th time you blast the 3,000 similar looking drones, you don't really care anymore. Doesn't matter how amazing the mechanics are. Lots of these smaller experiences sometimes are like tech demos in disguise, or sometimes it just feels that way. They're like awesome mechanics, but very, very low gameplay. It's like we reverted to the early days of gaming where we just had arcade games. You know, when the first home consoles came around, you didn't have story-driven games, you didn't have big games, you just had these select few type of arcade games, like in different skins. And that's what I kind of see happening with VR at the moment. And again, I don't say that this is a bad thing, that these are bad experiences, that these are bad games. No. They're great, but they will not convince like the average gamer, if there is something like an average gamer. They will not convince that person to spend hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars on VR. It's just not happening. And there's of course also a few technical issues that are still plaguing VR at the moment. For one, there is still motion sickness, which for a lot of people, including myself, mean that certain games are very painful or nauseating to play. And I've read reviews on Steam that some people are not even able to play for a minute or two with certain games. For example, Toy Plane Heroes. That's at like the threshold for me. I can play it for half an hour, but then I have to stop. I've read comments of people that said they had to turn it off after a minute because their stomach turns upside down, you know? And that is something, maybe they can figure out something to kind of dampen that, to dumb it down, but that's a huge point, because motion sickness like that will prevent rapid movement. And speaking of movement, that's the other big problem in technical terms right now, the locomotion problem. I've looked at it with the Freedom locomotion system on one of the VR Sundays, and it asked one big question: how do you move in a game? Do you teleport? Do you use walking via the trackpad? Do you walk on the spot like the Freedom locomotion system? What do you do? What is the convenient thing to do? What is the thing that immerses you most in the game? What's the thing that gives you the least amount of motion sickness? And the question is still out there, and the answer has not been found yet, I think. Developers are still struggling to find the optimal solution to these problems, really. I mean, there have been creative solutions, but no definitive answer yet, I would say. Again, sadly, this validates the concerns that the big developers have about VR, that it's right now it's not ripe enough to invest money in it. So it's looking pretty grim, you might say. But is there still hope for VR? Does VR have a future, or will it die out in the next few years? Well, I think there is still hope, as the article that I referenced in the beginning stated themselves. I really think there is hope, and it comes in these few ways, so to speak. First of all, I think the prices, they will fall a bit more. And as the prices fall, the of course, computer parts are gonna get cheaper. That's just how it is. Computer parts, newer graphic cards, newer processor units come out, and the older ones are gonna get cheaper. Now, there's like a minimum requirement you need for VR, and maybe in half a year, that will not be too bad of an investment to get the minimum amount of requirement PC power. So I really think the price point could be a non-issue in maybe a year or two. Also, what gives me a lot of hope is actually Sony's PlayStation VR. It feels like from all the big companies, Sony is one of the only ones that is really going into VR, and that's because they are going in a very, very limited direction, so to speak. They're going for only their console, and of course that means they can optimize it for their console, which drives down the price point a lot, because yeah, you need to get the PlayStation as you wouldn't need to get a computer for normal VR, but let's just be honest, the PlayStation is just a lot cheaper. So I think PlayStation VR might be able to push the VR hype a bit more, and that might actually make this whole VR a bit more enjoyable, a bit more attractive in a lot of people's eyes. Also, VR seems to get more and more traction in a non-gaming environment, which is very interesting, such as engineering or medicine purposes. Sure, this is technically not interesting for gamers, but in some indirect kind of way, there's a lot of technical lessons that can be learned from that, and it as well might put VR more into like the mainstream thought bubble, so to speak. And even if there are a lot of remasters, so to speak, that are on the release list, things like Skyrim, Fallout, they might actually be able to pull people into VR, even though they're like rehashes, so to speak, of already existing games. And personally, I don't think that a lot of people that have already played Fallout to death and already played Skyrim to death, that a lot of these people will actually get the VR version. I know I will, probably, because I want to see how they did it. But yeah, I mean, it remains to see if these actually have the pull that maybe the developers hope they will. And of course, there's always like the miracle possibility that there's like a random indie game that gets released that will ignite a VR hysteria. But right now, of course, that's not the main hope. I think the other points are much more important. And of course, maybe one of the other big developers will take a heart and create like an original content, huge VR game. But of course, at this point, that's all in the stars. So with that, I think I would like to end my presentation for today, and I would like to invite you, the viewer, to discuss. What do you think about this whole VR hype business at this point in the year? Do you own a VR device? What are your experiences with that? If you don't own a VR headset, why not? What was the reason that was keeping you from buying one? And what would need to happen to motivate you to buy a VR gadget? So really feel free to discuss in the comments, and of course I will continue my journey through virtual reality every Sunday if I can, and I'll try to bring you the coolest and the most fun VR games that I can find. And with that, I would like to thank you for watching this video. I've been Shadow, and I'll see you next time.